for Tuesday, January 17, 2023. And I believe we still don't have quorum.
No, we don't.
Okay. So, can we still go and approve the agenda? There's no vote.
We can approve the agenda, but we can't, or we can move forward with the agenda, but we can't, approve
The minutes.
the minutes.
That's it. Thank you for that. So everybody should have received the agenda via email earlier today, and there are a couple of changes that we need to do. And that's on the information items. I think the Young Leaders Regional Vision and Policy Collaboration, that person is not available. So we're gonna move the equity in a scenario planning up. And then we'll wait until next month for that particular presentation, right? So with that change, I think we are adopting the, I'll just ask for a motion to approve the agenda.
We have a quorum,
No.
and you can, at the discretion of the chair, you can make any decisions you want.
Okay, that's dangerous.
It is, isn't it? According to the bylaws, there you go.
All right, so we adopt the agenda as is with the clarification regarding that presentation, that information item. Again, unfortunately, we cannot approve the minutes because we don't have a quorum. So we'll just move on to the next item that we have online, and that's the public invitation. So it's invitation to, for anybody interested to address the committee, and I don't believe we have anyone that wishes to address us tonight. So we're moving really fast. And we don't have reports from the subcommittees. So let's just move on to the first information item. So we have the 2050 Regional Development Guide Values and Vision Update by Michael Larson. He's a planning analyst. I know Michael's been very busy with this thing.
Good afternoon, co-chairs Gonzalez and Jacobs and members of the EAC. I'm Michael Larson, planning analyst in the Community Development Division. I'm actually looking for the clicker so that, oh, there you go. Thank you.
Oh. Right there.
Appreciate it, thank you. Just one moment, please. It's here. Thank you. So good afternoon. I'm managing the development of values and vision for the 2050 Regional Development Guide. And I think all of you know that the Metropolitan Council is responsible for the development of a regional development guide that helps ensure the orderly and economic development of the region, including but not limited to transportation planning, regional wastewater system planning, land use policy, and regional parks. We'll be hard at work this year and next year, and plan on coming back to you with various aspects of this work. So I met with you in April of last year as we were beginning this process. Since that time, we've had a number of meetings with other advisory groups of the council and other groups, including the Land Use Advisory Committee, the Metropolitan Area Water Supply Committee, the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space, Regional Parks and Open Space Commission, and groups that are working on the development of the Regional Transportation Policy Plan. You should not be surprised that equity has come up as a frequent topic of discussion and concern among these groups as well. And I'm looking forward to sharing with you the work that we've done today. We've started to put pen to paper on a draft statement of values and vision statements, and I'd like to take this opportunity this evening to reflect what you shared back in April and to give us additional feedback on the proposed work that we have for you today. When we met back in April, we hadn't yet developed a framework for this effort. At that time, you had responded to a survey, and we discussed a number of different planning-related themes. So what I'd like to do today is to juxtapose what we've heard from you in the past, and compare that to see how that integrates with the narrative that we're proposing at this point in time. So we'd like to hear from you as in terms of, as we articulate values and vision, do we have the right tone? As we articulate this work, do our values seem clear? Does an overall vision emerge in your mind as what we're trying to achieve for the region? And do we have maybe important words or points that might be missing? So we are defining, values are core beliefs or principles that guide our work. That's how we're defining values. In our engagement to date with various groups, really 4 groupings of values have emerged that we're keeping in mind. The first are related to equity, justice, cultural competence, respect, and compassion. The second set of grouping of words that we've heard are leadership, collaboration, entrepreneurship, and innovation. The third is transparency, effectiveness, and accountability. And the fourth is stewardship, sustainability, and resilience. Now, what we're proposing to do now is keeping these set of values in mind. We're proposing what we're calling a set of core values. One, not surprisingly, is articulated as equity. And to keep the other sort of keywords and ideas in mind as we articulate our values. So what I would like to do now is to get into a little bit more detail in terms of what we're proposing, or some language that we've drafted for the council's consideration and for your consideration as well. So we're describing equity as a regional core value, and what how we're structuring this is what we want to do is begin with something that's a value statement. We value the well-being of the diverse communities of our region. And I will also say that the council had an opportunity to provide feedback and input on this language. So for the council members that are here today, I encourage you to share some of what the discussion was last Wednesday, and I can do that as well. The second part of defining our values is a second acknowledgement statement. As we recognize, in this particular case, we recognize the harm that injustices, including racism, have created. And the third part of this value structure is a statement of commitment. In this particular case, we are dedicated to creating systems, policies, and programs that repair past harm, foster an equitable future, and eliminate disparities. Communities that have been marginalized in the past will be at the center of this work in leadership roles. I think a lot of this language, this proposed language come from some of the principles from GARE, the Government Alliance on Racial Equity. What we tried to do with your past input and feedback is to sort of compare what you've said in the past to this proposed language, just to demonstrate that we have listened and want to be accountable to the input that we've had, and also to get your feedback, additional feedback. So this is the input that we've got from, and specifically related to equity. Someone had mentioned love, and that's something that I've shared with the council and other groups too. And it was really struck me that someone would talk about love as a value for the region. Another interesting contribution was geography stops being the focus and humans become the center of the work. And I think that's really a powerful thing to mention, as we do often have discussions about whether we are place-based, whether we're people-based, or we find some balance between the two. And of course, acknowledgement of stolen land, this quote, on which the region was built, was another core equity consideration. I do want to mention, as we kind of work to define this language, we get a lot of different really interesting and neat ideas from different groups that might function better as maybe a programmatic idea, as a way to measure our progress, that kind of thing. So kind of sorting out this language into finding a home for different different parts of it. So what I would like to do is gonna go through all 4 of these and then stop and see if you have any feedback for me. Leadership is the second proposed regional core value. And the language that we had proposed is we value those in our region who inspire and motivate others. And I think one of the council members kind of suggested maybe we should say something that for good or for positive outcomes, that sort of clarify the kind of leadership we're looking for. The second acknowledgement statement is we need leadership to help to confront the significant challenges we face around equity, climate change, and other pressing issues. And then the third commitment component of that is to maximize the potential of our region as communities. We need leadership that is diverse, collaborative, culturally competent, and innovative. This leadership needs to come from all sectors, including business, government, nonprofit, and education. Just kind of compared to the previous input that you provided, you talked about the Met Council operating outside of our usual process, taking a radical stance and doing things differently for better outcomes. Someone mentioned the importance of public research and leadership around equity, and I think that's something we've certainly been talking about internally, is operationalizing equity from a research standpoint as well as a leadership standpoint. And someone also mentioned engaging and approachable, and I think that's something that embodies leadership. Third regional core value is accountability. The language that we're proposing is we value being effective in our work and achieving measurable outcomes. The acknowledgement statement is we must be open to criticism and clearly understand if we're not achieving results. And the commitment statement is we recognize that we can only be successful in partnership with others. We will be transparent and flexible so that we can change course. Some of the related input from you in the past is what, we must think about how we measure equity to ensure that we are making progress. And I think that's embedded in this proposed definition. We need a plan of action to make room to talk about race and equity at the Met Council, and I think that's where there's a reasonable degree of consensus on that one. And comfort with having controversial conversations, and I think that's something we're working on. And I think accountability and leadership are about doing that, having not just easy conversations, but the difficult ones as well, where we might not agree or have a shared understanding. And the fourth proposed regional core value is stewardship. We value our region's natural and economic resources. I think financial was a suggestion from one of the council members, and that was, I think, my intention to include that, and I just forgot. The acknowledgement statement is we recognize that our resources may be vulnerable over time to changing conditions, including from climate change. And that might also be from changing financial conditions as well. And we must design our systems and allocate our resources in ways that can be sustained over time and support the needs of future generations. This is where I couldn't really identify any specific input from the EAC's prior inputs. So this would be an area where, your reaction or ideas. And I think that's all 4, right? So, chairs, I'd like to just pause there and ask if anyone has any feedback or suggestions.
So just to clarify, so we want people to address the regional core values, right? Equity, leadership, accountability, new ideas on those? Or to offer comments of what's already written down, all of the above?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, really wanted to structure this conversation today is to, one, demonstrate that I really did value your input, prior input, and make sure that we were integrating it in ways that we thought made sense. I think one of our commitments is to, all ideas will be carried forward and hopefully all good ideas be carried forward and find a home. But if you have any additional thoughts about how we phrased it, or something that might be missing, we'd love to hear what that might be.
I saw Anita.
Okay, I have a couple.
Thank you.
Starting with equity original core value. Number 2, we recognize the harm that injustices, including racism, have created. But yet you have equity as part of your core values. What about the inequities? In not just injustices, but inequities, because racism can occur, but there's also inequities that are, what do they call it now, micro, whatever, anyway. And the second one, or the third one, we are dedicated to creating systems, policies, and programs. But one of the questions I have is, are they beneficial? Because what's good for one, a system is good, or a policy is good for one community, is not necessarily good for another one. So it can't be a blanket policy. It should be beneficial as well. Moving into leadership, culturally competent. When I think of culturally competent, I think that's a lot of pressure for somebody who isn't me to be competent in my life, my experiences. Maybe culturally responsive. Because otherwise, culturally competence puts a lot of pressure on an individual,
Understood, yeah.
and that's stewardship, yeah. But
Right.
being responsive, I think, more aligns with stewardship. Personally, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Anything else?
That was it.
Okay. Just a point of clarification, and it's, from that point that Anita just made, are we gonna have definitions of the terms that you use somewhere? Like cultural competence?
Mr. Chair, I think we could, yeah, I think we
Okay.
could, we're not at that point yet.
Okay,
I think that's the struggle, I think with language, is that it can have very many different meanings to different people, different contexts, so, yeah, it is a challenge.
okay.
And I think where we need further definition, I think we do that. One of the principles that I think I like to work on or like to be a proponent of is the idea of progressive elaboration, is that we elaborate or further explain when we need to.
Okay.
So we don't necessarily define it here, but, you know, for example, we might, if we have additional context or reference material, that's immediately available. So if we did keep the term culturally competent, or if we, because I think I've heard that term, but if we amend it to be something like culturally responsive, because that will resonate with more people, immediately we can provide additional information about the kinds of things we mean by that, the kinds of things we might do as a result of that, or when we refer to that, this is what we mean, is someone who is responsive or connected with the community in some fashion, or is from that community in some fashion, depending on the context.
Any other comments? Yeah.
In this leadership one, I wasn't clear if it meant literal leadership of the council, like the chair and the council members, or if it's a broader perspective of leadership in the region. So just maybe to think about clarifying the language to say it one way or another. And then in the stewardship one, I think one of the things that I felt was missing is maybe to recognize that stewardship needs to take equity into account in the sense of we want these natural and economic resources to be shared by all the different peoples of the region. And then stewardship also has this forward-looking perspective, and so I would say, and the future residents of the region, so that it's like not just the people who are here right now, but the people who will come after all of us. To see it for future generations.
Right.
Okay, any other comments? Chai?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Michael, thanks for ordering these very thoughtfully. I really appreciate that equity is the first value listed. I was on the climate work group, And I thought about how in places like New York City, sometimes there are a lot of the poor black and brown folks live in like basement level dwellings that sometimes are not properly legal. And so when hurricanes come, they're the first people to drown. And with climate change, and that relates to stewardship, right? So we manage the built environment through LCA. We manage the natural environment through our park funding. And so in the stewardship bucket, we could say something about, going back to Leah's comments, being thoughtful about how we manage the built and natural environment, because we have a lot of power in growing or maintaining our natural resources, and that's really important for climate change.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Anita?
Finally got to the accountability. Thanks. The input, we must think about how we measure equity outcomes to ensure that we are making progress. So are you talking about just quantitative outcomes? Or are you talking about qualitative as well?
I guess I would, Mr. Chairs and EAC member, I guess I would look to you to help us define what that might be. My immediate reaction is that quantitative measures are important, but that additional like input on what a qualitative response to this might look like.
What, for example, water, what's the effect that people will have with clean water? Or the services that Met Council puts out, whether it's a bus, right, the buses or the vans that pick up people, are they reporting back
Yes.
that the services that have been extended
Right.
or not extended to their their areas, and they have to maybe drive someplace to take the public transit, whereas because they stop services, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
How is affecting their quality of life?
Sure. How I'd like to respond to that is, I think what we would like to see is a mix of quantitative data and a qualitative input into how we're doing as a region. And one of the things I've been a proponent of is storytelling to accompany that, or to be sort of partner with the data. What's the data telling us? What are people telling us? And here's an example of a person's personal experience. I think we talk about lived experience, right, as a sort of term. And how does that lived experience reflect what we see in the numbers or in the science or in the survey, that kind of thing. So there is this kind of broad understanding of what we mean, like understanding of like, are we being effective? And is people's relationship to the transit system or to metro mobility or improving water quality or that kind of thing, or improving parks access opportunities, that kind of thing. Yeah, thank you.
Anybody else? I have a couple of comments, and I'm just thinking, been thinking about this since we had the presentation at the council the other day, and on the equity, on the that third item that says we're dedicated to creating system, policies, and programs that repair past harm, etc. I think that, that's fine, creating systems, policies, and programs, but we also perhaps need to take the lead in changing attitudes and narratives. Because it's actually easier to tweak a policy or create a new program, a new bus line or whatever, but what about changing people's mindsets and the narratives that are populated through the media about certain issues? And I think that taking that step too, or addressing that, should also be part of creating equity, because unless we change the mentality, the attitudes, and the narratives, we might still have to address these issues not only in 30 years, but in 130 years. Unless people change, then the problems might still remain. And on that same value, I was just thinking about that great phrase that geography stopped being the focus and humans become the center of the work. And I'm just thinking about the changes at the legislature for the election of the council members. My fear on that is that we will have like a electoral college model in which, some states have more power than others regardless of the population, simply because that's how it's submitted. So if there is going to be a change to the structure of the council, it has to be based on population and not on geography. And I'm sorry for the folks in Chaska or those places, but where most people live is where most resources should be allocated, because we serve people, we don't serve acres of land. So the only reason I'm stressing that is because of the changes to the overall structure, so that might be an issue down the road that we need to keep that in mind. That's about it.
Should I continue?
Yeah.
Alright, okay, got too much animation in here, I have to click through all of it. Note to self. So now I'd like to give you an overview of what we identified as cross-cutting issues for the region that are forming the basis for a proposed regional vision. And obviously the vision is what we would like to achieve for the region. So not surprisingly, equity is one of those cross-cutting issues that affects much if not most of what we do, maybe everything. So that first vision statement is our region is equitable, inclusive, and welcoming. The idea that we're inclusive and welcoming was certainly strongly proposed by the council, and that's certainly a theme that has emerged from various input. The second theme is climate, of course, and the associated statement, vision statement, is our region leads on climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. The third is natural systems, and the proposed vision statement is our region protects and restores natural systems. And the fourth is public health, safety, and well-being, and the associated vision statement with that is our region's communities are healthy, safe, and vibrant. So I'll go through each of these one by one in a similar way that I did with the values. So we are really drawing from a lot of different needs around planning and issues in the region, trying to be cross-cutting as we have been with the values. And the first part of the statement is we uphold communities harmed by past and present injustices, including institutionalized racism. Communities of color participate fully in the economic and social life in the region. And I've had a little pushback on that internally, and if that's a meaningful statement, and who defines what fully means, and what does economic and social life of the region mean. So I'm curious to know if we have a similar reaction to that, or propose something different. The third is we no longer have significant income and wealth disparities related to race. And I will just kind of reemphasize here too that some of this language may get incorporated into the vision, as some of this language maybe evolve into particular goal statements. These are statements that really just sort of fuel for the conversation to articulate what we mean by equitable, inclusive, and welcoming. The next statement is that places throughout the region are affordable and accessible, including for people with disabilities. And then the last statement is second to last is we are authentically welcoming to existing residents, newcomers, and immigrants alike. So not Minnesota nice, but something that's more authentic. And the last one is we nurture opportunities for those with economic disadvantages. Quite a bit of input from you in the past, a lot related to particular outcomes, related to, socioeconomic outcomes, property ownership, leadership positions in business and the like, the elimination of disparities, opportunities for affordability in neighborhoods, and specifically reparations. And again, that last one, maybe what we may define that as a potential programmatic response in terms of making amends. So, that could inform our vision, it could inform a goal, it could inform something that we do later on the line. So just want to keep that in mind. And I will continue the second, unrelated to climate leadership. First statement is our most vulnerable communities are resilient to the negative impacts of climate change. I think one of the council members last week wanted to make sure that all people in the region are resilient to the negative impacts of climate change. I guess my response would be, I think many of them will be, regardless of what we do. But that certainly the most vulnerable, like people who live in the basement or the garden level in an apartment building in a flood zone may be somebody we have special consideration for. We have eliminated or mitigated greenhouse gas emissions from all sectors, including transportation, development, and industry. Again, a potential goal statement. Our region has effective and reliable transit, ride sharing, and non-motorized transportation systems. So in other words, we have leadership on in terms of not producing greenhouse gas through transportation. And our built environment, infrastructure, and natural environment have adapted to and are resilient to emerging climate-related stresses, so that as there's more freeze-thaw cycles or there's more flooding, that our infrastructure considers that. And here's where this gets a little bit specific, and we didn't have an opportunity last time to really dive in, and this is an area where we would welcome your input. Natural systems, a region protects and restores natural systems. Development is orderly, efficient, and integrates natural systems as community assets. This kind of speaks to some of our authority around creating a regional development guide. Development and infrastructure respect the constraints and the vulnerability of natural systems so that we don't compromise the environment in the pursuit of development, or we strike balances that are appropriate. We protect surface and groundwater resources from contamination and unsustainable use. This is a current problem that we're addressing. We protect high quality landscape and habitat, especially those significant to native communities. And this particular point was a subject of conversation about understanding that there's probably a few different significant things in here, and just trying to get the wording, optimize the wording. So we're thinking about how we might talk about respecting native land, native histories, existing native communities, and what we also mean by cultural landscapes, and maybe there's two points here that can be separated. Something to think about. And we preserve the highest quality agricultural land for food production. Here. And here's another area. So again, this is a little bit in an area that was not much of a focus with us last time. So if you have equity perspectives on this or other perspectives they might have, I'd love to hear your input. And finally, and we can go back and talk always, finally, public health, safety, and well-being. Our region is healthy, safe, and vibrant. Regional systems and services support the health and safety of our residents and workers. Cost-effective and equitable transportation alternatives provide reliable access to destinations. Our residents have safe and affordable housing choices throughout the region. And that kind of does speak to prior EAC input on another slide. Our residents have equitable access to high-quality open space, outdoor recreation, and trails. And our economic centers are vibrant and accessible, fostering collaboration and innovation. I think some council members thought this maybe was a little specific and kind of left out some other important areas of the region, so that's something to keep in mind, something we're working on. And our educational and economic partnerships nurture the competitiveness of our workforce and economy. We had a couple of ideas that we thought kind of fit with this. We had a region with vision. We have a region with creativity and art, and I think That's not probably something that's currently in our language, and so something for us to consider. In terms of the arts, role of the arts in terms of our economy and the vibrancy of our community has been particularly important. So maybe something to hold up as we articulate what we love about our region currently, and what we want to see more of. And the second statement was I believe this was just a quote, we have spaces that are respected. And I think this may come from the survey because I didn't really have much to work with there, but I'd like to hear if one of you wrote that or if you have any ideas what that might mean. I'd love to hear that and how that might be integrated. Mr. and Madam Chairs, that is the end of the four components of the proposed regional vision for consideration. Love to hear again what additional input you might have or reaction to any of that.
Anita?
Thank you. I'm looking at climate and natural systems or natural resources. One of the things that we in the Green Zone, Minneapolis Green Zone, talk about is education. Education and resources that are available to us as urban dwellers as we have more dangerous storms, power loss, water loss. What can we do to help ourselves and our neighbors? One of the things that I think of is on the light rail and in the public transportation and the buses, and that is, you got all kinds of advertisement in there. Maybe something, education posters in there, what to do if we're hit by a storm and your power goes out. Just kind of those kinds of things so that, people are, because when I'm riding on the bus, I don't have anything else to do, I'm gonna look and start reading the posters.
Sure.
It's like, okay. And that would be just both for climate and the natural resources. Not just resources in education, maybe providing some grants to community groups and work with the community groups, have a liaison, work with the community groups and say, here's some of the things that, you can talk about. Everybody's got an organization that applies for grants, everybody's got an audience, and that's their purpose. And so use that to the advantage of saying, you have your audience, we have the information. Here's the information to create some messages for your audiences. And money goes along with it.
Thank you.
Any other comments? No, Phil?
Okay, just had a few. So the first one is on the equity one, but I feel pretty strongly that instead of communities of color, it should be more stronger, it should be just all communities participate fully in economic and social life of the region, because sometimes the community may change, depending on who the new immigrant is or depending on the economics. I just think all communities should have a place at the table.
Sure.
And then
Sure.
from now until 2050, that could change, kind of thing too. And then the other one is on the native, like we brought about the species I think it's under the natural systems.
Mm-hmm.
So I mentioned, but I wonder if we could just do it more like the native plants, it's like protect high quality landscapes and habitats. I think it's there, but and it says significant native communities, but it also should just be native prairie, native forest, old growth forest. More kind of adopted to what was there when Minnesota, the First Nations people were there, kind of thing, to bring it back.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's really interesting because struggling with this idea, this integrated idea, and it's generating a lot of, I wasn't quite sure where to go with this or how to split it apart, and it's generating a lot of feedback and conversation, so I really appreciate that. And your thought triggered something, Anita, that you had brought up about using the terms inequities or disparities, and I think I agree that it's appropriate to call those out in particular. Mm-hmm. If we're, our vision is equity because this would be an equitable region because of these inequities or disparities. And I think the challenge too, while we want all communities have access and all communities to be resilient. We do have these inequities and disparities that I think deserve to be called out and recognized, that our racial disparities are particularly, like in terms of our nation level, are particularly problematic, and I think is a generational effort, and so I think it deserves to be called out in of itself. So trying to have that balance between, trying to strike that balance between having a kind of a universal thing, and then also really acknowledging some specific problems and a specific vision for particular communities. But yeah, so anyway, that's what I mean.
And then my last point was on the economic centers, and it
Yeah.
seems like it's more of a judgment that that's actually the best, like, like the model, you go downtown to go shopping or what have you, or you go to the big hub. And I think the more local you can shop and do your things, more walkability, it's better. Like last night, I was just around between 46th and 52nd on Chicago Avenue, and they have a vibrant community where it's really neighborhood. And I think Minneapolis has really done a good job over time where when the Kmart went away, there's no big boxes, so still preserve the small grocery stores, you get the small places to work out at, the stores, and I think that's a good model. But when you say economic centers, it feels like it goes like we're either gonna go downtown or go to some
Sure.
big box hub kind
Sure.
of thing, so I would just say maybe neighborhood economic or
Yeah,
preserve that
yeah.
local economic vibrant.
I do wanna maybe talk a little bit about kind of where I was trying to go with this, and I think I raised it a little bit at the council. Is that one of the things that we want the regional development guide to do is to address the strengths and weaknesses of our overall regional economy. We have what's called a regional economic framework that we developed in partnership with the Center for Economic Inclusion in Greater MSP. And it addresses a number of things about the dynamics of our economy and the strengths and weaknesses of our economy. So what I was trying to get a little bit of a place-based approach to where are the places in the region that are strong in terms of our economy, because the particular places have particular industries. Maybe it's our corporate headquarters that generate jobs, or it's in finance, or it's in medical devices, or different growth opportunities where we can grow jobs. And so understand like where there might be place-based dimension of that, and not at the expense of, shopping local and developing, local entrepreneurs, or building, building capital for minority-owned businesses and that kind of thing, all of those different dimensions. But sort of getting a strong reaction to this particular, I think there's an opportunity to reframe this a little different, so it gets at both of those things, or it gets at the multiple things. Because I think there are many salient things in the regional economic framework that get at both place-based and people-based, whether it's workforce development, to increase people's income, thinking about the role of accessibility in transit, get workers to jobs and that kind of thing, and what maybe are the needs of different industries for our region in particular. But I certainly agree that we want vibrancy throughout the region, regardless of whether it's downtown Minneapolis, or it's downtown Hopkins, or it's South Robert Street, or Stillwater, it's like we're certainly not trying to pick winners and losers, but recognize that there are certain drivers in our economy because of the scale of the region.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
To that point about different drivers, one of the things that I think could be valuable in each of these 4 areas is recognizing the kind of individual, business, community, city, regional role in making these things happen. So for example, in the climate one, this came to mind because of Anita's comment about education. I could have education and know to turn off my lights when I leave a room. Target can make a much bigger difference by changing out all their light bulbs to, low carbon footprint light bulbs. And then cities can do things because of zoning or policy, so it may be something that talks about the different drivers happening at different levels working in concert together.
Yeah, tandem or whatever, yeah. Yeah,
Anita?
Just a simple, we've had this discussion before here. When I start thinking of all this, the first thing that comes to mind is Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. If you look at the language, Title VI, it should, in my mind, be fairly easy. As you're looking at how you do your work, everybody has the right to equal access, everybody has the right to information and resources, and everybody has the right to know. And to me, that just, when I start looking at creating something, to keep that in mind, how do we do that? What do we need to do in our work that would be in compliance with Title VI?
thank you.
Maybe it's just oversimplified for me because,
Well, yeah, I've not reviewed the Title VI language recently, in recent memory. But I certainly I will say look at it to look for maybe with opportunities to parrot that language or mirror that language and see where there might be some overlap. Yeah,
Yeah.
and maybe like you said, to sometimes simple and direct is better than,
trying to recreate a
Yep.
wheel, because it's already been,
Right.
yeah. It's already in the language.
yep, understood, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two comments. My first one is, I
I'm sorry,
appreciate you
excuse me.
putting in the,
I don't mean to interrupt. Can you give him the mic?
oh, sure. Thank you.
I appreciate that.
My first point is, thanks for adding the line about creativity and art. The Met Council is a huge animal, and even as a council member, I learn new things every week. A few weeks ago, we had a phenomenal presentation by park staff, and I learned for the first time that we have a staff person dedicated to public art. And so then that overlaps with, and they're doing a great outreach with BIPOC and indigenous artists to help us put public art on wrapping our buses and train stations and the pillars that are light rail stops and that. And I learned that for the first time, so that's fascinating. But the point is, then that interfaces with our income and DBE policies and goals, procuring those kinds of services. And so I appreciate that. And then my other comment is, when we have hard conversations, we have to call out racial inequity and to hold the line and call out racial equity in particular because of the historical processes that have left people out. So you look at the west side of St. Paul historically, different kinds of immigrants have been run out of the west side of St. Paul. You look at Cedar Riverside, the blacks and Jews were run out of Cedar Riverside in the 60s. And so then they just go somewhere else. And so a lot of folks end up in St. Louis Park, and I've heard elected white officials refer to St. Louis Park as St. George Park, right? And you go to the east side of St. Paul where Danes Bluff, and you go back 100 years, it was the Eastern Europeans, but these policies of discriminations happen based on race and country of origin, and so the system and the policies were systematic, so that's why we have to call out the racial inequities. Thank you.
Any other comments?
I got a comment.
Yeah.
I don't even know where to start with my comments about. Presentation was good. I appreciate the work that went into it. I just feel it's a salad that I don't wanna eat. It's just a lot in here. When, to me, I feel that the word equity assumes that I want something someone else has versus access. Okay. So I have a problem with equity. I have a problem with that word. Because it's just this idea that we wanna look at these communities as wanting to be something that they're not. We need to give them, I prefer the word access. In my line of work, is how do we make sure that no matter where you are, no matter what community you're in, how do we create access for people to stay in their community and experience and actualize everything they want to be?
Well,
Does that make
could I jump in?
I hear you.
Yep, right.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, a filter that I try to use when I'm kind of working with folks and proposing language is to make sure that, and I know that I don't always get it right, but trying not to come across as paternalistic. And I think, like, when we talk about, I think when they had that comment about, people of color, fully participating in the social and economic life, it's like, well, am I the one defining what is, full participation in the life of the region? Is that presumptuous? Are they not? Am I drawing that conclusion? So anyway, just wanted to share that as an anecdote to kind of like the challenge of coming up with language that people can share. It means the same thing and has the right tone, and so that's why I talk about tone. I think some people are concerned about, not just about access, but about outcomes as well, and measured, whether quantitative or qualitatively. So I wonder if it's a both and kind of situation with crafting this, but I look to you for advice on that.
I can speak,
Yeah.
council member and Madam Chair. I don't need a mic. I just wanted
Go
to
ahead.
say, when it comes to the question that you had about for participating, I think that you should use more language around livability in that area, because everybody measures their own livability different. And then defining what those livability aspects may be and what they also could be as well, would help frame that sentence just a little bit better for you. Because when we talk about economic, could you go back to it? Because when we talk
Yeah,
about,
which sentence are you talking about? Under,
the one that you said you needed help on. Just a minute ago, I guess you need help on all of it.
I need help on lots of things.
Right
no
there,
longer have-
communities of color participate
Yeah,
fully
yeah,
in
that one. Yep,
economic and
yep.
social life. I think if we add livability in that,
Oh, okay.
I think it'll feed in differently. Because you talk about economic repetitive in this, right? So we wanna include other language that just don't go towards economic, cause social life can be equated to livability.
Right, absolutely, right.
So how can we improve the full livability of the community instead of just focusing on economic and social life? Because livability can be walkability, it can be so many things. So participating fully in all of the aspects that life happens in their area.
Yeah, one of the ideas that has come up is that, we need to be explicit about, if we have, people define these things differently for themselves, right? Like you just mentioned. And so I think if there's a way to articulate that, and it comes to mind, like there's a happiness index. And I'm not saying that like income and wealth disparities aren't important, but we've talked about Nepal or some countries, like people rate their happiness based on not just how much money they have, but maybe their social cohesion, their
Exactly.
connectedness, their spirituality, all of
Right.
these things. And so we can't look to one measure. I mean, some people, some would advocate, let's do all that we can to increase people's income, and I think that's probably a good thing, but it's not the only thing. And anyway, I think hopefully you appreciate some of the struggle that we have with multiple conversations here and kind of coming to some shared understanding of what we mean here. Thank you though.
Madam Chair, Madam Chair. I would also like to say that instead of just using communities of color, maybe you can use more than just communities of color, like underrepresented communities, underserved communities. Because when you talk just specifically to color, it kind of dismisses the other ramifications
Sure.
that may come in a low
Sure.
income area. So using more representation around that and in that census of, you know, the other experiences that those communities may go through.
I'm
Like
curious.
not having enough representation.
Yeah, I'm curious what people think of the word underserved. I've always had a little bit of struggle with that, and I'm not quite sure why.
I don't know why.
Yeah, I mean, you can't answer why.
People are very underserved, right?
It's the truth.
And
Yeah.
education levels, like, you know,
I-
if you measure the schools of education in the inner cities and the more racial, I guess, dedicated areas, communities of color, you'll see that they're different
Right,
from the areas. So I think livability can be measured,
so that's a term that you're comfortable
but
with.
it's like making sure that you check all the boxes, because you can measure walkability. You can go in a community and say, like, how far is a park? How far is a grocery store?
Right,
You know, how far is a biking center? Can they even bike in this area?
right,
So I think those things are measurable, but we just need to start calling those things out so people can understand what that livability looks like. Because if nobody gives them the direction of how to be happy or what's supposed to be in this area, it's like they're gonna be left out. So examples need to be given. So what does a community outside of Minnesota look like that's happier? So where is the happiest place in the United States? Let's go here and figure out how can we mimic those things, right? Because there's examples out there, because Canada is very livable, right? They don't even let inner roads into their communities, right? So how can we mimic some of these outside forces to improve the livability in these communities, which will over time improve the equitable resources that they're able to contribute to society? Oh yeah, and also mental health needs to be added to this as well.
Yeah.
we heard that at council.
That's a whole nother subject.
Yeah, I mean, a particular place to just be added under equity or any other, that we did hear that at council, mental health as an issue. Certainly, when we were talking about public health, safety and well-being, you know, issues related to obviously the pandemic was a huge public health crisis, and I think it impacted people very differently. And in terms of the resilience, and I know it was not helpful for anyone's mental health, I think, unless you're an extreme introvert.
Mental health is- I think if we can call mental health out as a caveat when our planning comes around, then I think that can feed into more equitable decisions that communities can make for themselves, right? Because if my health isn't good, I'm not gonna be thinking about how I can live. I'm gonna be thinking about, you know, maybe how I can get to work. I'm not thinking about contributing my voice to my environment, but just to my household. And I think a lot of times in our communities, specifically the community that I represent, and where I come from, I can think of my mom not being able to think that far. You know, so how can we improve the mental health in the
Yeah.
area to be able to at least get those comments from the people that we really need the feedback from? You know?
Yeah, thank you.
Any other comments? I just wanna add a couple of things, and it's fascinating hearing from other folks, because some of the same ideas that have been banging around my head, I think, were mentioned here. As far as the issue with, you know, communities of color participate fully in economic and social life, I think that calling out additional communities, and at the council, as Mike said, there was this discussion of disabilities, but also age, and that was another criteria. But it's things that are not related specifically to ethnicity or race, but that those particular communities are significantly and affected by the current processes that we have. But then I was also thinking about the discussion about who defines happiness and what do we want. And I was just thinking of this story that I had, this experience that I had when I worked in Arizona. I met a Navajo lady, and she was like 90 years old. And her granddaughter was happy that they got English as a second language services in that corner of the reservation. So her grandma can finally learn English. And the grandma said, why would I want to learn English? I don't need it. I live in my community and everybody speaks Diné, the Navajo. And it's worked fine for the last 80 years of my life. And I don't think I need to speak English to be an American, being an Navajo. So that service that community was certainly underserved with certain educational services, but they didn't want them because they were perfectly happy with that and it worked for them. So that was a long way of saying that we need to find a way to give agency to the communities to decide what underserved means and what service means in the first place. I don't want to be, I love my Irish wife, but I don't want to be Irish. I'm happy with who I am. And hey, Puerto Rico. I don't want to change. I don't need to change. And nobody should force me to change. And I get to decide that. And that goes for culture, for language, for economic and other opportunities. So the issue is not that we want folks to have a specific outcome, excuse me, is to have folks the opportunity to make the call, what do they want to do? And that works for them. And that was a long way of saying that maybe that could be like another statement or perhaps a definition of what we mean as, providing that space for all communities to be all that they can be, as long as they define what that is by themselves.
Yeah, thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you for these insights, it's really helpful. I think that's maybe why I've had problems with the word underserved.
Yeah.
Because maybe it's like we're not serving them in the way that they'd like to be served or
I
something.
think this council member,
Yeah.
Madam Chair, I think historically, the underserved comes from the history of how economics and resources are distributed within. So it's not, I don't feel underserved because I'm not able to go to the grocery store. It's how does my neighbor feel? And who am I living next to? What resources aren't they getting that I'm getting? Yeah, I'm successful, but yet I have a neighbor here that's struggling every day just to feed her children. So it's like, if I'm living next to these people, how successful am I really? And how can I project my success and the resources I have on somebody that can't even relate to me? So in underserved, it's more of a historical underserved.
Yep.
And a projection to how redlining has affected these communities, to how, not having adequate health, having these big McDonald's and these big Burger Kings concentrated in these communities. We have more convenience stores than we have grocery stores that's healthy. Those things are not mandated in those communities. So yeah, children are eating more pop and juice and they're getting overweight because they have access to it. So having those restrictions on some of those areas, like there's no restrictions, because, economics, you get what I'm saying? You can post a business anywhere, which should be something that's feasible, but we also need more green spaces as far as healthy restaurants in these areas too, or more parks and recs that actually people can afford. Why do I have to go to the YMCA and spend my last dollar when recreation should be given to my child? You get what I'm saying? My child has nowhere to go after school. I have no time to myself as a mother. I get off work, then I have to go, or as a father or whoever, where are these systems? Where is this health care? Where's the help that I pay for in my taxes that I'm going to work for every day? And if these are the organizations that are supposed to help me in this area, let's look at some of those everyday needs that I have, not these bigger pictures that I don't even understand. Because the bigger picture is going to be taken care of anyways. But we need to be looking more at micro things instead of macro things in these areas, and especially these specific areas that have specific problems. Because if you go door to door, you'll be able to see the likeness and the problems that these people have. So yes, happiness may not seem like it can be measured, but disparities can. So how can we turn those disparities around and improve those livabilities for those people? People that look like everybody in this
If I
room.
may, I think that the issue is, I personally think, it's just that the term underserved is too limiting, because the way to solve underservice is to provide more services, right? But that's not really the issue, is how to create a space in which people are free to determine what services in the first place, how they want the services, by whom, whether I want the service or not, or whether there are any other alternatives to what is being offered to me as a service. So it's more, there are more pieces to the puzzle than just, getting more services. Like just following up on Tori's example that, certain communities have plenty of fast food restaurants. Well, they're not underserved.
They're overserved.
They're overserved as far as McDonald's is concerned. I know that's not what we're talking about, but that's what the narrow image comes to my mind when people said those are underserved communities. So serving them more is not the answer. It's serving them different, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's why I use the term beneficial. Because, you're talking about the inequities. I live in North Minneapolis. I grocery shop in the suburbs because there are no stores available. There are convenience stores, liquor stores, and hair salons. My neighbors, I see them walking to the convenience store and then walking back with bags and bags, or waiting at the bus stop to go grocery shopping. For me, I drive. So what's beneficial for me and works for me doesn't necessarily work for my neighbors. That's why when I said put some information, it's about the livability. It's about why do I need to, because everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, most people would think for themselves, what works for themselves? What works for me? What works for me is I can get in my car and drive to the suburbs. What doesn't work for my neighbor.
Right.
So it's beneficial to me, but it's not for my neighbor. That's the livability, the same thing with the livability.
If I may ask, just another thought, and then I'll shut up. As far as, we're talking about the things, how we want Minnesota or the region to look in 2050. I don't know, what about starting the plan by identifying those deficiencies up front, like that preamble that says, in 2023, we have these disparities, these things that need to be addressed. And the 2025 plan is how to get us to address these specific things. Because if we are talking about, I don't know, like the climate ones, that we need to create a resilient climate. So let's start by saying what's going on now and what's gonna happen if we don't do anything in 30 years. Is that gonna be part of the report to include those deficiencies and why we need to address these specific issues?
Yeah, Councilmember, there will be in the regional development guide, there will be information about, detailing the challenges.
Yeah.
I think when you were talking, I was reminded that some of the council feedback was that some of the language is a little bit on the negative side. So again, it's this sort of balance between sort of creating something that's optimistic but not about the future. That's like we celebrating what's great about the region and also envisioning that we're overcoming our problems. Like and try to put a positive spin and hopefulness in it, and not dismissing like the inequities or the disparities that we do have in underserved communities and that kind of thing. So it will be grounded in information about, the various risks, like, the threats to our region, the threats of climate change, the threats to, you know, quality of life or livability if we don't address, you know, these things that are important to people. Does that answer your question? I mean, and also it certainly could take direction from you as to how.
I know that, I mean, I knew that part was going to be included, but what I was thinking is making those deficiencies as explicit as we're making the answers. So I will do an equal, you know, like the bullet points like we have, like right now you have the equity one, so we uphold communities harmed by past and present injustice.
Right.
So have a whole
Yeah.
paragraph that identifies,
Right.
these are the specific injustices
Yes.
that we are talking about, name, dates, locations, etc. And that could be like an annex or whatever, but
Right.
I'm just saying, making it as specific as the solutions.
Right, no, that's point well taken. I think if people are curious or unfamiliar with a particular issue and they want to learn more, I'd like to give them an opportunity to do that. You know, if not in that section, in the appendix or a reference to material that, you know, can explain that or educate people about it. But I think like really cogent data or synopsis of the problem is important. So that kind of captures what we're talking about, the working definitions of these issues.
I was thinking you could get a buy-in from me, but, you know, I'm 68 years old, so, you know, I kind of look at, will I be around 2050? But I don't think you can get a buy-in from my grandchildren. Or, you know, they're teenagers.
Yeah, well, and unfortunately, we were going to hear about and I forget what the title on the agenda was, the Young Leaders Regional Vision Policy Club. I actually came up with that title. I proposed it and when I was working with Darcy. Yeah, unfortunately, that's, I think, an example where we really were trying to you'll hear more about it next month, but to develop a cohort of young leaders throughout the vision who are in their late teens, early 20s, that will reflect, will have families and maybe be at sort of, you know, in sort of peak of their careers in 2050. And so we've been thinking a lot about that, how to build a model for how to engage young people who are thinking about, who can think about 2050.
Yeah.
And you say, how old am I gonna be in 2050? I forget, but probably not working on the next plan, but.
Yeah, but, yeah.
Any other questions? As we are running out of time. Comments? Anything else that you'd like to add?
No, I really appreciate the conversation and the sort of nuanced insights from you. So, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, appreciate it.
Thank you.
And our next presentation is the equity in scenario planning, and we have Baris, Gumus-Dawes. And I think I mangled your name completely here.
No, you are very close.
Okay.
I'm very used to a lot worse, so don't worry.
Yes. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me over tonight and in this cold weather you all showed up. Oh, the mic, here we go. So I really appreciate it. My name is Baris Gumus-Dawes and I'm a planning analyst at the Community Development Division. And I'm glad to have this chance to talk to you. And I really hope that this is not a one-way communication. I'm hoping that I could keep my remarks very brief, maybe 5 to 6 minutes so that we can have more time to talk. And I'd like to hear from you, your insights, and I'm mostly here to listen and learn because this is really the beginning of our conversation when it comes to this. I will hopefully come back to have further conversations. So I want to emphasize that this conversation will be about equity in the future. Most of the times we talk about equity in the present, and we're going to be using a new method in this regional policy planning cycle, and it's called scenario planning. So I'd like to talk a little about that. As you know, every 10 years we have the council planning for the next 30 years. And normally the way we do planning, we look at what has happened in the past and say, so how is the future gonna shake out? And we assume that it's gonna be very similar to what we have. And we look at that future and plan for that future. But as you saw during the pandemic too, that's not always the case. The future looks sometimes very different and we don't really know how things are gonna play out. So we decided this time around to use a technique called scenario planning. And scenario planning is really about planning for the future. Not knowing what we don't know, we're just beginning to ask questions about what could happen. So what if questions are what we were trying to look at. And we're hoping that if we look at the what if piece, we might be able to prepare for different possibilities. I mean, think about the pandemic, we weren't really prepared for it. So we had all kinds of inequities that popped out as a result, and we're hoping that maybe we can be a little more prepared, a little more resilient when it comes to preparing for the future. So it comes from a far more humble place, I would say. So we had many conversations about which uncertainties we should be thinking about. And as a planning agency, there are a couple things that we pay attention to. And the first one of these is how much will the region grow? We don't really know how much we're gonna grow because most of our growth, regional growth, comes from immigration, and we don't know how much immigration we're gonna get. We also don't know how much employment growth we're gonna get because most of our growth somewhat depends on national economy and some of it depends on the international economy. So we don't really know how much the region will grow when it comes to employment as well. And the second piece of what we don't know is, well, I should just pull back a little and say, like, why do we care about that? Because everything we do as the council depends on how many people will be there. We don't know how many people will be riding the buses, how many people will be using the flushes. So we really need to have an idea to be able to make our investments accordingly. And in terms of the location of growth, where people will live also does matter. We don't know if people are going to be living and working in urban areas, in the urban core, or if we're going to be living in the urban or suburban areas. And again, that has implications because we have to serve people where they are. If many of us are living and working in the suburbs, we just have to think about extending our sewer pipes, for instance. If they are living in suburban areas, we might have to put new sewer pipes to be able to serve them. If they're living in the regional, the urban core of the region, then we don't have to lay out new pipes, but we can expand the ones that we have. So it really depends on where people live because we serve people where they are. So those two uncertainties are the things that we're thinking about, and I should go back and show you. The four futures that we decided to look at were basically based on how much the region would grow and where the region would grow. So we're looking at a case where the region might grow at a higher rate than what we anticipate right now, and we're looking at a situation where it might grow less than how much we anticipate that the region would grow. We are also looking at situations where growth would be more urban as opposed to more suburban. So the combinations of those work out as four different scenarios. We have a situation where we have high growth in urban areas, high growth in suburban areas, and low growth in suburban and low growth in urban areas. So those are the four scenarios we're thinking about and we're hoping to plan for. So how does scenario planning relate to equity? Basically, scenario planning helps us to think about equity in the future, not just in the present. We talk a lot about the disparities, existing disparities. We need to also think about the disparities in the future. And we need to think about them in ways that we can make policy decisions so that they produce equitable outcomes down the road in 50 years or in 30 years. So when we look at inequity in the future, we're gonna be focusing on the equity implications of these futures. We asked the question, what if the future differs from what we expected? And the key questions are, what happens to communities in each scenario? Which communities would benefit from each scenario? Which communities would be negatively impacted? So we have to start thinking about the implications of each scenario on people, because we will be trying to sort out the solutions to people's problems. So I want to give you an example. Before I came here, I asked a little about this group and trying to figure out what you are interested in. And I was informed that housing and transportation were the things that you do pay attention to. So I just pulled out a housing example. And I just want to talk a little bit about the kind of housing issues that might come into play if we're looking at a high urban growth scenario. In a scenario like that, you have a lot of people coming into the region, or existing residents are growing at the rates the current birth rates allow us to grow. And when we have a lot of people in the region, there's a lot of people demanding housing. And when you have extra housing demand, then you're gonna have pressure on the housing prices. So people will be less likely to afford the housing prices if their incomes stay the same way. And if history is any indication, wages and incomes tend to stagnate quite a bit. So overall, if you look at the housing prices, we're gonna have a situation where housing prices would be less affordable, or housing would be less affordable to everyone, but especially to low-income residents who live in the urban areas, because most of this growth would be taking place in the urban areas. And when you have that situation, the situation is likely to be harder for low-income residents, because they have to compete with folks who are higher income. And you have a lot of demand for housing in the core. And when lower income folks cannot compete with higher income residents, then you have a situation where you have to deal with displacement. So that's one of the situations where we have a high urban growth scenario putting some pressure on people in terms of housing. If you think about the opposite of this situation, you can think of high suburban growth. The situation will be different. There will be a lot of people living in the suburban areas, and especially in areas where you have growth in suburbs where the housing prices were relatively low. They will experience some growth in housing prices. So folks who prefer to drive to suburban areas to find cheaper housing, that drive till you qualify option is not going to be very viable, because housing would be a lot more expensive in the suburban areas. And that might have certain implications too. So where growth happens really impacts how people are going to be impacted when it comes to housing, when it comes to transportation. So that's really one of the pieces that I'm hoping that we could talk about today. And I would like us to think about the following questions as we're thinking about it. How does a scenario impact your community in terms of housing, transportation, could be wastewater and parks? What concerns would you have in a scenario? What would you be excited about? And then I think the most crucial piece is who benefits from a scenario and who is negatively impacted. So what I'm hoping is that we can have a conversation about these questions. And I don't expect you to have a point to make about every scenario, and it doesn't have to be every single topic. Could be housing only or transportation. Whatever you think is crucial is what I'm hoping to hear from you. So it's just some issues will pop up. They would be directly related to equity, and they would be in the back of your minds more than others. I would like to hear about those. And then once we have our conversation, I just want to quickly give you the next steps, and I will go back to the previous slide so you can see the questions. In terms of next steps, I'm hoping to come back here and ask you about which one of these scenarios you think are the best for the region. They might not necessarily be the best, but they might have perhaps the most equitable outcomes. And I'd like to ask which ones might not be working from an equity point of view. And that we can, the point is so that we can have a conversation about what can we do to steer the conversation into a more equitable direction. What can we do to move the region toward the best option as opposed to something that is subpar, and what can we do to avoid the worst? So on that note, I'm gonna go back to the previous slide and leave it at that and hear from you. Thank you.
All right, just a clarifying point before, so the four scenarios are high growth, low growth, with low urban and high urban and low suburban and high suburban growth? Okay, so those are all, we're gonna be discussing that from our own perspectives or based on the data of actual world data of where do the council think that it would be in 20 or 30 years? Like, because we know the trends right now, are we gonna use the current trends or not?
That's a good question. We do have a fifth scenario, which is called the business as usual scenario. That's the baseline that would happen if things turned out to be the way they have been over the last 10 years.
Okay.
So we just look at what if nothing changed and we projected everything into the future. That would be the baseline or the business as usual. These scenarios all compare to business as usual.
I see.
So if you have high growth, that means that's higher growth than business as usual. If you have suburban, then it's more suburban than the business as usual.
Okay. All right, well, give free rein to your imagination then. Any comments to start with? Anita?
When you're talking about the region, are you talking about the 7 metro counties?
Yes.
Okay. Because that makes a difference
How so?
on housing. Well, for example, in the rural parts of Scott, Dakota, Washington, Carver, and northern part of Anoka, you have a lot of the farms that are being sold, farmland being sold to developers who are creating housing. You also have, in my community, a lot of people who are working those farms. Now, when those farms are sold, they're looking for employment. And so they're going to like some of the factories out in that area. So transportation becomes an issue, number one. Housing becomes, and affordable housing becomes an issue. Now, in the metro, it's different. And by metro, I mean Anoka, Hennepin, and Ramsey, where the largest cities are.
That's a good example. I never thought about it, and despite working with migrant and field workers for many years, so.
I was a planning analyst, so
Yeah, so
where people move was my
those
job.
folks that work in a rural area and then the farm gets sold for housing, so they lose their jobs, but most likely they won't be able to afford to buy the houses that are gonna be built in where they used to work.
Yeah.
So they'll have to move somewhere else. So that's like 20 steps down the road, there's some.
Yeah, if somebody is living and working on
Effects
a farm in, say, Washington County or Carver County, usually they start to establish themselves. I'm thinking of the Latino community speaking of. They start to establish themselves with their families and within their community. So they want to stay in Carver and Washington, where they've established. But then housing becomes an issue, because now they're looking at different jobs, but then transportation, moving around from those areas. So it's not just the urban and suburban, it's the rural.
Yeah, in the original description of the scenarios, we do have rural as a definite part of the definition as well. We divided the region into urban, suburban, and rural. And I am kind of using the terms urban and suburban just to simplify it a little bit,
Okay,
just so that we can have a more
so
layperson.
suburban would include the rural.
We kept that separately, so I think that your observation is right on point, because that's something that we look at. For instance, one of the findings that we have for the scenarios is that if we have a dispersed development pattern, meaning we are developing outside the urban core, that tends to impinge upon the rural areas more. So we lose more agricultural land if we have suburban growth, because it puts pressure toward the rural areas as well. So what you're saying makes total sense, and I really appreciate this fine point in terms of getting what the implications of getting more rural development. That's very, very valuable. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Chai and then Phil.
Thanks. But I think similarly to Anita's point, I think there will be an interesting push and pull in the farming situation, because I have a relative who recently bought land up in Centerville, hoping that either this biennium or the next, that if the Democrats can legalize recreational weed, then he has land to plant marijuana. And so a lot of Hmong folks in the last couple of years have gone to Oklahoma and California to plant weed. And if the local landscape changes, they'll come back and try to get farming here. But then, of course, that creates a whole other set of problems, because we can't eat weed, right? So then the farmland that folks might be using to grow weed won't be used to grow poultry and milk and whatever. And so that's another thing I just want to bring up.
Phil?
Yeah, from my perspective, I see high growth from suburban and urban, but a lot of times there's a battle when it comes to affordable housing, like grants and that. The things are geared more for urban grants, so the suburbs don't get the grants with it, so it kind of affects the affordable housing, so it's expensive for the urban areas because the demand keeps going up. Suburbs, they'll get the farmland, and I know we had a study a couple years ago that affordable housing, a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom, twin home was going for $458,000 in Lakeville. And where they just, you don't have it, but they're continuing not getting affordability there. So then either people are forced to move further out, or they're moving to the urban center, and then there's more pressure on some of the scenarios, with it. And I also see since we're bringing up the rural stuff, both my parents raised farmers, so I got a little bit on that, plus I'm on the Clean Water Council. But where we're seeing is if you plant corn or beans, you can 100% insure both of those. So we're burning up the corn, you clear cut the trees off, and then they have no risk of losing. So the high fertilization and doing it, but that's what's dictating the price of the land. It's not the rutabagas you grow or the, raise the chickens or anything. It's basically the corn that we're burning up. And if you could kind of change with the corn, the situation where the land price is based on food production or, weed or whatever, it's gonna be a lot better. But right now, that's what's dictated. It makes it not affordable for people buying land or farmland or even living in the rural areas with it.
I heard the price of corn seed itself was a deterrent to a lot of the farmers. I have some in-laws who are farmers, and that was their issue this year, was that the price of corn seed had gone up, so they just were growing wheat for their animals.
Okay.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it might be a better trend of that, but yeah, you got the seed price, you got the fertilizer price.
So economics
the corn pickers price.
What you can afford and not afford.
I just had another thought here about the demographic changes, and my understanding is that the population of Minnesota is aging, like significantly. So I'm just wondering, how will that impact the housing? And I'm thinking, the folks that are getting older, they might move out of their houses into assisted living or other different types of living situations. So there might be some vacant houses, actual houses in neighborhoods as opposed to apartment buildings that are coming into the market. But I don't know if that's a significant enough change to make that a meaningful projection. Like, is our housing stock gonna increase in houses, in actual houses, simply because folks are moving into apartments in buildings because they're getting older and that's where they wanna be, and there's gonna be a lot of people doing that, so there will be more houses available. And is that gonna lower the prices of the houses and then allow folks to move into actual neighborhoods as opposed to the urban area? I don't know, that, again, thinking like 20 steps down the road from one event, what would be the ramifications? As far as the, being a former immigration attorney, I've seen the ups and downs of how Congress authorizes the number of visas and immigrants through the years. But we're just one immigration reform bill from changing the whole system. So if that happens, like it happened in the 80s, when the Reagan amnesty, and that's gonna open the door to a significant increase in migration almost overnight. I'm not saying that that's gonna happen, but it's quite likely because
Or the licensing.
there's so many things that can change at the legislature that it will be like a single event. And then that will trigger a huge increase in the population if, again, immigration reform is passed. I don't know how to plan about that, but if that happens, like I said, it's quite easy that we will have, 10 million people immigrating to the US in a short amount of time. In addition to getting people who are here undocumented legalized. And then they can bring their relatives. And that change migration might triple or quadruple the current rates. I don't know how to plan about that. Because we don't know if that's gonna happen, but if it does, it's gonna be a huge change. And it's gonna change the demographics of Minnesota almost overnight.
In the United States.
And then the United States, almost overnight. I'm all for that, but.
No, I think that you're right. Those high growth scenarios are, if you look at the demographic breakdown, we're gonna be going up to, I believe, 47% non-white population. And those are our official forecasts in terms of demographic forecasts, I should say. So these high growth scenarios, they are one way of thinking about exactly what you're talking about, is that population growth will be coming from immigration primarily, and to some extent climate refugees. We're gonna see more of that as other areas are hit. Our region is gonna be climate-wise pretty attractive. As cold as it is now, it's not gonna be as cold, hopefully.
I'm looking forward to the palm trees in St. Paul, Mississippi. But if that, let's assuming that there's increased migration, who will those folks be? Like you said, it will be including climate refugees. So it won't be like the high skill H-1B visa, technical guys people that get approved now. It will be folks that are escaping crises. So you might have folks that have limited skills in addition to limited English language skills. So you might have a group of people that are coming that might be able to do, manual labor or basic manufacture, but that will require them more educational services to get them the skills to move on, plus the English language skills. You don't need to do that with certain other groups that are migrating now, because by the selection process, they already have those skills. So again, it's not just the number of people that come, but because of who they are, that's gonna demand different services in certain areas so they can integrate better. And that brings us to the issue of transportation too, because if you have low skills people that need to go to a community college, for example, to acquire skills, but they just got here, so they don't have a car, they need public transit to go to, Normandale Community College so they can take those classes. So just by the fact that you're bringing migrants, you might need more public transportation
Yeah.
simply because of the needs that they have immediately after arriving, as opposed to folks that have been here for a number of years that already have cars, so they don't need them. So that would be like a short-term need, but that needs to be addressed. Yeah.
Yeah, the thing, Mr. Chair, I have a counterpoint to your first point about aging folks. So on the east side of St. Paul, we are already in the situation where the majority of the folks on the east side of St. Paul are between the age 18 and 30. And but if you're from certain communities, like in the Hmong community, for a lot of us who are still traditional, we don't believe in senior living, assisted living, nursing homes. We don't send our parents there. For a lot of us, they're gonna live with one of the siblings, in my case, the next unmarried son until they pass, or the next youngest son. And so they're gonna age in place, so they're not gonna go to an apartment, they're gonna live with me or my brother or whatever. And so,
multi-family homes.
yeah, exactly, so some folks are gonna just age in place, and so the house will still be in the family. And so that's just a counterpoint to consider. Thank you.
No, that's point well taken. I was just thinking about the white population. That's the trend, that they're selling their houses and moving into. And those are the ones that are the elderly, that are aging now. But that's a good point. But 30 years down the road, you're gonna have the next elderly population are gonna be aging in place because they will have different traditions. So we might not need those assisted housing units 30 years down the road because nobody's gonna go there, right? Okay.
I should mention that to my son, that you should do that. Those nursing homes are not nice.
It's already planned. I'm living in my house until I can't take care of myself, and one of my kids will take me in. That's already a plan.
So, I think the low growth, whether it's suburban or urban, has more risks for equity, for a couple reasons. The first is because just naturally, when there's not growth, there's not a lot of new resources or ideas or innovation coming into a region. And to me, it speaks to maybe entrenchment of existing problems rather than creative solutions to problems. And the other thing is in a low growth scenario, the region itself might lose some of the power dynamic it has when negotiating political issues with greater Minnesota. Because if we're not continuing to grow and innovate and show our power, then legislators from other parts of the state start to control the conversation at the Capitol more and more. So I think a medium or higher growth scenario is a benefit to the region and to equity. I don't have as much opinion about urban or suburban, other than that the nice thing about urban growth is that there's already schools built in cities, there's already streets built, there's already parks built out. So you get to make a lot of existing infrastructure rather than have to keep building new infrastructure. And currently in the situation where much of our growth has happened in the suburbs, what we're seeing is underutilization of some of those big schools that are not full for their capacity.
For the suburban schools?
No, in cities or the
Oh,
first-rate
I see.
suburbs, their schools are, have more capacity than they're currently serving because the infrastructure is already built, but the population in those communities has aged and there's not as many students as there used to be.
I'll say a quick comment, council member and Madam Chair. I just want to say that when looking at a lot of these scenarios, it's good to ensure the bigger people that's playing in these areas as far as the actual people that's renting out the apartments. That's because if you look at it in those urban areas, it's a lot apartment driven. So we're working to live, essentially. So where can we put the cap? Or where can we give incentives to those big apartment chains to be able to say, or charge them more for the space? Or I don't really know what the answer is, but some type of flooring or some caps on rental. I think if you look at other countries, I say other countries because not inside the US, because we're a very capitalist place where we do believe in people able to charge what they want to charge. But if you go to like Japan and you look at their systems and how they live, there's a lot of caps. So medical is capped. You have a book for medical, for this scar, you pay this much. You know, and a lot of times in the United States, we're fighting for opportunities because we can either pay for housing or healthcare. You know, so there needs to be some internal system that allows the low income person, because low income or the community gets bigger and bigger every day. Inflation rises as we live. You know, the price of the dollar is, I can't buy 4 chips for $1 anymore. You know, so just my ability to live now is different than 50 years from now. So looking at that economic growth, what does that look like as far as housing? 1,400 now is gonna be, what, 2,000 in the future? You know, so, and if I'm paying $2,000 more on housing in the future, how much more money am I making at work?
So what's affordable?
How many kids can I actually have to even live in this society? So yes, we have an aging population because people my age, we don't think of having kids as being something that we can have a lot of, you know, because we can't afford to carry 10 kids other than somebody coming from another country and their living situation is different, you know, because they come here with the amount of kids because they're populating a lot already because their living is different over there than it is here. You know, so I think in looking at housing, you have to look at all these other determinants that go along with it, such as healthcare, such as, you know, all the other things it takes to even live. Because if my housing go up, then I'm not gonna be able to
Anita?
do much more.
I'm assuming you go to the legislature and talk about these issues, or take them to the, because when you're talking about caps and that, and I'm thinking, and you're looking at housing in the future, wouldn't it make sense to then keep that as something that you take to the legislature and, you know, somebody writes a bill that we're gonna cap this and you support that? Or you talk to, people, you know, you talk to your senators and your congressmen and I don't know how politically involved you can be, but I think that it's worth getting involved in that. And the reason I say legislature, because I've been working with 2 groups that are already taking things to the legislature. And we've worked on it for months. One of them is the licensing, by the way.
Just keeping track of the time, so we're almost out of time. So any last comments or anything that Baris would like to add?
Well, I'm hoping I can come back to get more, to hear more from you. This has been very helpful. But I'm hoping that this conversation will be a regional conversation. Which one of these things you see more to be more beneficial to the region, and what can we do to be able to promote that kind of a future? These futures are not really normative. We're not going to pick one. We're just exploring what can we do to meet the challenges or the opportunities that come from each future. So if you could keep that in the back of your minds, and if you have any additional comments, please do send them to me. I would really appreciate it. This will go to the equity piece of it. We are really open to hearing what you have to say.
Really quickly, I can think maybe have somebody start tracking migration of communities.
Migration and
Of communities
Communities.
within your regions,
Okay.
especially immigrant communities, as we're talking about Latino community, but Somali community, African community.
Any other thoughts? Okay, well, Pacheco, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And
thank you.
appreciate it. And moving on with the agenda. I don't think I have anything to report from my committees. I don't know if Chai or Phil had anything to add.
Mr. Chair, from the community development a few hours ago, I think the main thing that was really interesting is we're kind of making the process for the livable housing initiative account, you're making the evaluation requirements easier to read, understand, and more streamlined, and so that process would be more efficient going forward. And if folks are interested in the affordable housing policies that we have an impact on, you can rewatch the meeting or look at the presentation. It's really interesting.
All right, Phil?
Well, yeah, maybe the only thing coming to mind is, on the transportation, we're starting to get more interest from operators. And we have a couple hiring events coming up, shortly, so we're looking for, more people to come. And one of the events, actually, that people can actually, drive the bus too, you know, part of the training and see if they like it and that then too. So I think that's helpful. And, you know, some of our routes have been pulled back a little bit because we didn't have enough operators. But we just opened up the D line that goes from the Mall of America up through Brooklyn Park and Center, rapid bus transit, so that's been popular. And I know like the Orange Line coming from Burnsville north to downtown, it's been holding about 1,300 riders per workday, you know, with it. So they're looking for more riders, and you know, we're constantly working on safety issues with cameras and trying to put more people on our officers on the train, but we're still short a lot of officers that wanna work or hiring in that then, so that's another place where we could really use more assistance, because I think that will help us with our safety and security as well.
Yeah, and we kept getting the updates on the shortfall of bus operators and train operators. So if you know of anyone with a pulse, encourage them to apply. We really need people, and one change that they made, that Metro Transit made, is that before the change, an agreement with the union was made that you no longer had to be a Metro Transit bus driver before you can apply to drive the trains. That was a requirement before. So now, if you have the skills, you can apply directly to be a light rail operator as opposed to being a bus operator first. So that opens the space for folks to apply, and we encourage anyone interested to look into it. So thank you.
Mr. Generally, please tell folks, the Met Council has about 200 jobs opening right now, and so there are a lot of great jobs across, you know, IT, all the departments, and so please tell folks about the Met Council job openings. We have talking about climate refugees. One of the recent hires that we had was George Gonzalez. So he came from Florida. So
yeah,
if you have relatives who live elsewhere, they can move here and work for us.
Excellent, thank you. Any other announcements?
Yeah, this Saturday, the 21st, at Hennepin County Library North at 1315 Lowry, there's gonna be there's a mental health services it's called Permission to Grieve, giving space and tools for BIPOC males to grieve. So, and it's for Black and brown men, by Black and brown men. So all the therapists that are gonna be there, there's gonna be certified circle keepers there. And it's sponsored by Illini and the St. Paul JCs. So anybody that knows anybody that wants to get some help. So, excellent. And it's from 10 to 3 Saturday.
Get to get a new job driving a bus.
Hey, you gonna need
Take care
some
of
milk.
my mental health. I can't beat it.
Yeah, you gonna need some.
All right, any other announcements? No? Well, I just have one announcement. This is my last meeting as co-chair of the EAC. So it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for your patience and understanding. And I was thinking of maybe later this year, if there's an opening, I might apply to be just a community member here at the EAC. But
You can apply
Not
today.
just. We are more than just.
Actually, we have some openings for that as well. So for anybody that wants to apply by January 31st for the EAC committee, Come on
I
down.
don't think I'll be ready by then. but-
Okay.
But there's an opening later in the year, I might apply, so thank you very much, and. the
I'll
next-
give you 3 months before you.
Most likely, but I don't know. So thank you
Francisco,
very much.
I think we should all give Francisco a round of applause for 4 years of leadership.
The money made it all worthwhile. Thank you.
But if you guys do know someone that you might wanna recommend, maybe a friend for the committee, we're open at the moment. So if you wanna
Yes.
bring somebody to check us out, even check us out next February, we're available for that.
All right, well, thank you very much, appreciate it, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.